he awoke to silence. A silence so deep it felt alive, pressing against his eardrums, crawling beneath his skin. The air was thick, like the aftermath of an explosion that had forgotten to end. The sky above him was a dying wound, red clouds convulsing in slow motion, split apart by distant lightning. Each flash revealed a battlefield that stretched endlessly, a graveyard of machines and flesh. Hulk did not know where he was, only that everything hurt. His skin, thicker than tank armor, trembled as if it too remembered fear. His lungs burned with every breath of poisoned air. When he finally looked down, he saw not green blood, but black, tar-like, slow, shimmering with something unnatural. He blinked, and for a heartbeat, he saw two worlds overlapping. One, the sterile light of a laboratory, voices screaming equations, Banner's trembling hands covered in sweat. The other, this place, this hell. And for the first time, Banner's voice did not fight him. It whispered from within, "I don't think we're home anymore." He rose, each movement like lifting mountains. Around him, the bodies of alien creatures lay piled upon the ground. Some looked like humans wrapped in steel. Others, hulking, tusked beasts with crude weapons still clutched in their dead hands. Warhammer 40,000. The name was not yet known to him, but the feeling was. This was a universe forged in war, where even the air smelled of blood and faith. Something stirred nearby, a low, guttural chant. Wah. The word hit him like a vibration through the bones. He turned, muscles tightening, and saw them. Dozens of orcs, each a mountain of muscle and metal, their yellow eyes glowing through the smoke. Yet, they were not charging, they were kneeling. The largest among them stepped forward, his voice booming like rolling thunder. "The Green One lives." They stared at him as if beholding a god, and in their eyes he saw not fear, but worship. He wanted to speak, to tell them he wasn't their god, that he didn't even know who he was anymore. But when he opened his mouth, the words that came out were neither Banner's nor Hulk's, but something between them. A mind reborn in madness. "Who am I?" The orcs roared in reply, misunderstanding the question, hearing instead a declaration of power. They shouted until the ground shook. "Warboss, Warboss!" And deep inside, Banner's voice trembled. "They think you're one of them." Hulk's lips curved into a grim half-smile. "Maybe I am." Days passed, or what this world called days. Time here was fractured, stretched thin like skin over bone. They followed him without question. He did not ask for command. It was given, carved into existence by sheer presence. He was different, not just bigger, not just angrier, but aware. His rage was not blind now. It had focus, shape, and terrifying clarity. He watched the orcs build, fight, and laugh in the face of death. They were chaos given form, yet beneath the madness he saw a pattern, a rhythm, war as religion, battle as breath. Banner's mind worked like an engine behind his skull. If this was the only language the galaxy understood war, then he would speak it fluently. So he gave the WAAGH something it had never known before: discipline. Under his command, the orcs changed. They still howled, still fought like beasts, but now they fought together. He taught them formation, flanking maneuvers, and the art of striking fear before the first shot was fired. He made them sharpen their crude weapons, repair their rusted guns, polish their war machines until they gleamed with menace. And when they marched, the ground shook not with chaos but with order. The galaxy noticed. Imperial scouts whispered of a new warboss, one who planned his battles, who studied his enemies before tearing them apart. A creature who roared like a beast, but spoke like a general. They called him Da Thinkin' Green God. At night, when the stars bled light through the dust, he sat alone upon the wreckage of a fallen fortress. His army feasted and bellowed below, yet he did not join them. Banner's voice echoed in the hollow corridors of his mind. "You're changing them. You're changing yourself." "They follow strength," Hulk replied. "And I am strong." "No," Banner whispered. "You're becoming something worse. You're becoming what this universe makes of everything a weapon." Hulk said nothing. He looked at his hands, massive, green, trembling, and saw both salvation and damnation written in every scar. A distant explosion lit the horizon, the sky glowing crimson. He watched it burn, and for a fleeting moment, he felt peace. Because in destruction, at least, there was clarity. But clarity never lasts long in the 41st millennium. The Imperium came. They came not with fear, but with faith, that most dangerous kind of madness. Thousands of ships filled the void, each carrying soldiers who would die gladly for their emperor. When they saw the orc horde led by something not quite orc, not quite man, they did not hesitate. Exterminatus authorized. The order spread through the fleet like fire through oil, and from orbit, the heavens themselves opened fire. The first blast vaporized mountains, the second erased oceans. The orcs screamed WAAAGH one last time, their voices echoing into eternity before being silenced by light. Hulk stood at the center of it all. His army burned around him, his skin melting away, his bones glowing like iron in a forge, and yet, he did not fall. "This is what you wanted," Banner whispered, fading. "To be left alone, to end the noise." "No," Hulk growled. "I wanted to matter." He roared, and the sound tore through space, not a cry of pain, but of defiance. His voice reached even the minds of those aboard the Imperium ships, freezing hearts mid-beat. Then the world exploded. Silence again. Only this time, it was not empty, it was alive. Hulk floated in the void, half dead, half dreaming. The stars bent around him, and from the edges of existence, voices whispered. Ancient, endless, mocking. "We see you, little god of green. So much rage, so much purpose, wasted on pity. Come to us, we can make your fury eternal." He felt them, the chaos gods, brushing against his soul like knives through silk. For a heartbeat, he almost answered. Then Banner's voice returned, faint but defiant. "Don't. They'll turn you into another monster." "Maybe," Hulk whispered, "but maybe that's what I've always been." A burst of green light tore through the void, swallowing him whole. When it faded, there was no trace left, no wreckage, no body, no god. Only a faint echo that drifted through the warp, carried on the currents of madness and eternity. Hulk still lives, and somewhere, in the infinite machinery of the grimdark future, something laughed low, endless, and hungry. He awoke again, this time to sound. The rhythmic pounding of drums, the guttural laughter of beasts, the grind of machines older than reason. And underneath it all, a single word repeated like heartbeat and prayer. "Boss." When Hulk opened his eyes, he saw firelight dancing across hundreds of faces, green, tusked, wide-eyed with reverence. The orcs had rebuilt around him. They had waited for him. 100 crude banners fluttered in the toxic wind, each painted with his image, a monstrous figure wreathed in flames, eyes glowing like dying stars. They called him Green Prophet. To them, his survival from the extermination was proof of divinity. To Hulk, it was proof of something worse, that the galaxy refused to let him die. He rose from the crater that had become his throne. Ash cascaded from his shoulders like dust from a tomb. The nearest knob knelt before him, his armor dented and scorched. "Boss," he growled, trembling with awe. "Yous came back from Daboom." Hulk's voice was low, guttural yet calm in a way that made even the biggest orcs flinch. No one kills Hulk. The mob erupted in cheers. Drums thundered, chains rattled, 1,000 throats roared the sacred war cry of orc kind. WAAAGH! The noise shook the very earth, sending flocks of carrion birds screaming into the ash-choked sky. But as their cheers reached him, Hulk did not smile. Because deep inside, Banner whispered the truth. "You've become their god." "No," Hulk answered quietly. "I've become their excuse." Under his command, the WAAAGH changed. Gone were the senseless raids and drunken charges. Gone were the endless feuds over scraps of metal and pride. Hulk forged them into something terrible, a disciplined horde. They learned formation. They learned patience. They learned fear. The first time an orc fled from battle, Hulk tore his head from his shoulders and tossed it into the crowd. Then he spoke, voice cold and deliberate, each word a sermon written in blood. "Fear is fine. Fear keeps you alive. But if you run from me, nothing in the galaxy will hide you. And so, for the first time in history, the orcs learned control. Their enemies called it an impossibility. The Inquisition called it heresy. The galaxy called it blasphemy. The WAAAGH of Hulk was no longer chaos. It was calculation. When they marched, it was not a tide, it was a weapon. They struck imperial worlds in silence before unleashing their fury, overwhelming planetary defenses with brutal precision. Cities fell in hours. Fortresses burned before the defenders even realized they were under siege. And at the head of every slaughter, Hulk walked through the fire, silent, steady, unstoppable. The Imperium began whispering a new name. The disciplined WAAGH. A contradiction. A nightmare. And its leader, the impossible monster who had tamed madness itself. But victory is the slowest form of death. With each conquest, Hulk felt the rage inside him fade, not vanish, but hollow. Every victory brought less satisfaction, every scream less joy. In the solitude of his command chamber, a throne made from the skulls of tanks and titans, he spoke to Banner in the dark. They die. We live. But for what? Banner's voice came faintly, tired and cold. For control, for survival, you've turned chaos into order. You've done what no one in this galaxy could. Then why does it feel like losing? Banner said nothing. Because there was no answer. Not in a universe that fed on pain and called it purpose. The Imperium finally took notice. Not as observers, but as executioners. Reports reached the High Lords of Terror. An orc warboss demonstrating tactical intelligence, capable of planetary conquest in under 72 hours. Imperial forces collapsing, entire sectors consumed. And so came the order that echoed through every ship and shrine. The green heresy must end, deploy the Astartes. The sky above Hulk's newest conquest, the Forge world Belisar, split apart. From the void descended the Emperor's angels, clad in ceramite and fire. The Space Marines came in silence, their drop pods crashing into the fields like meteor storms. Hulk watched them from the ramparts of his fortress. His army roared for battle. He said nothing. So they finally send gods, he murmured. Good. The first wave hit like thunder. Bolter-rounds tore through orc ranks, shredding green flesh and metal alike. Plasma fire scorched the walls. But for every orc that fell, 2 more rose. Hulk waded into the fray, his roar drowning out even the cannon fire. He ripped a dreadnought apart with his bare hands, using its smoking sarcophagus as a weapon. When a squad of ultramarines charged him, he crushed their leader beneath his heel and threw the others into the sky. But the Astartes did not break. They were not men. They were devotion made flesh. They were what the Emperor had built to answer the universe's cruelty. And they came for Hulk with holy purpose. Days passed. The sky burned red. The ground became glass. Then came the voice, cold, final, absolute. Initiate orbital sacrifice. The Space Marines' flagship turned toward the planet. It was an ancient ship, a relic from the Great Crusade, and its commander knew that firing would mean their own deaths. He did not hesitate. For the Emperor. The bombardment began. The first impact erased mountains. The second swallowed armies. As the light approached, Hulk looked to the heavens and laughed, not in madness, but in understanding. Now I know what gods fear. Banner's voice trembled inside him. What's that? Something they can't control. The explosion swallowed him whole. For an instant, his mind stretched beyond the material. He felt every death on the planet, as if it were his own. He felt the orcs die calling his name. He felt the Space Marines die fulfilling their faith. He felt the galaxy watching. And then he felt nothing. There was no pain in death, only motion. Falling. Drifting. Remembering. In that darkness, he saw flashes of the past. Banner's experiments. The screams. The endless wars of Earth. But then came something new, a vision of fire without end. Worlds devoured. Men praying to machines. Beasts worshipping war. And above it all, a shadow whispered to him from beyond stars. You have killed gods, Green One, but you cannot kill hunger. He recognized the voice, though he had never heard it before. The warp spoke. The Chaos Gods, each a reflection of everything that lived and suffered, had noticed him. "Join us," they hissed. "Be what you were born to be." He looked into that infinity and saw his own reflection, vast, monstrous, eternal, a deity made from rage, walking between madness and order. He could accept. He could rule. He could be endless. But Banner's voice, quiet, desperate, cut through the silence. "Don't. If you become them, there will be no coming back." Hulk's eyes opened in the void. "I wasn't planning to come back." A flash of green light tore across the warp, and when it faded, the galaxy recorded a miracle and a curse. A world burned to nothing, a ship sacrificed to its emperor, and a god of war reborn somewhere deep within the Catachan system. He fell from the sky like a comet, a second sun crashing through the jungle canopy. The world trembled. The beasts screamed. And when the smoke cleared, he lay there alone, broken, surrounded by silence. Alive again. He fell through leaves like knives and branches like spears. The jungle accepted him as violence accepts a reason. When he struck the earth, the ground did not crack so much as submit. Mud rose in a hot breath, insects detonated into mist, and trees leaned away as if a new sun had been hammered into the soil. For a while there was only the taste of iron and the perfume of rot. Then the jungle's breath returned, wet, patient, carnivorous. Banner spoke first, because pain always brings him up from the dark. "We're alive, again." Hulk opened his eyes to a sky lost beneath a cathedral of leaves. Great fronds dripped with venom, flowers pulsed with meat-bright colors, and the trunks of trees were armored in thorns the size of bayonets. Every shadow was a throat. Every root was a trap. Catachan. He did not know the name yet, but the planet needed none. Some worlds are not places, they are verdicts. He stood. The jungle answered. A carpet of lesser things hurried to abandon the ground beneath him. Centipedes with gunmetal plates, spiders like clasping hands, leeches that remembered oceans. Far off, something huge laughed in a voice made of tendons. He tested his ribs. They complained, then obeyed. The flesh knitted, the breath steadied. Rage glowed low and steady, like a coal cupped in a giant's palm. "No army," Banner said softly. "No orcs, no ships, just us." Hulk rolled his shoulders. "Good." The first contact was the smell of promethium. A second later came the sound, short, terrified bursts of lasfire, the slap of boots in mud, the insect whine of a vox choked with static and prayer. The jungle flinched at the noise, then leaned closer. Hulk moved. He did not crash through the green, he argued with it, and the green conceded. Vines snapped, trunks split, the earth accepted the weight of a meteor walking. He pushed through a palisade of thorns and saw them, a knot of guardsmen in tattered flak, back to back around a failing heavy bolter. Faces cut from hunger and discipline. Eyes full of will and the wrong kind of hope. The Tyranids came like the idea of hunger made flesh. Gaunts in a tide, chittering, leaping, their limbs arranged like questions with only one answer. A warrior strode behind them, crest flaring, spines wet with poison. The jungle liked them. They smelled like its future. The guardsmen held, men always do, right up until they don't. A sergeant kept count with curses, voice collapsing into a ragged litany. "By the throne, by the throne, by the throne." Hulk landed among the gaunts. Bodies folded around his knees. Chitin became powder. The world hiccuped. He grabbed a warrior by the throat and used it to erase the next wave, pinwheeling the corpse like a flail until it was simply a red idea raining across leaves. Silence tried to happen. The jungle rejected it. Another wave screamed. Hulk welcomed it like weather. He broke what came, tore what broke, and threw what tore. By the time the last gaunt remembered fear, it had already been introduced to a tree at terminal velocity. Smoke lifted. The heavy bolter coughed its last belt and fell quiet like a dog that had finished trying to please. The guardsmen stared. A few made the sign of the Aquila. One fainted without the dignity of prior notice. The sergeant's mouth moved, but his voice seemed to be held hostage by disbelief. Hulk turned his head, green eyes lowering to meet human height. "You're welcome," he said. The sergeant found his voice, used it like a weapon, and hid his gratitude in the scabbard of command. Identify yourself. Hulk. Regiment. Hulk considered. Whole legions had died trying to answer smaller questions. None. The sergeant swallowed, decided to live long enough to file a report about this. He jerked his chin at the bodies. They'll be back. They don't stop. Then neither do I. They move together, because survival is the simplest alliance. The squad was 5th Catachan by accent and knife discipline. They treated the jungle like an enemy they respected too much to turn their backs on. Hulk watched and learned. They watched and understood nothing except that the monster was on their side for the length of one breath, then maybe the next. Banner measured the men with that old clinical pity. They're children with scars. So are we, Hulk said. He carried the heavy bolter when the man who loved it could not. He tore paths, the knife leaves could not close fast enough. He listened when the sergeant whispered roots like curses, and when night fell, night here being not an absence of light but an occupation force, he stood with his back to their tiny fire and let the jungle try to understand him. It failed. The jungle does not understand mercy. At midnight something big and wrong came on, 20 silent feet. It wore bark as armor and antlers as antennae. Its mouth opened in the wrong direction, revealing a throat that smiled. Hulk did not roar. He simply stepped forward and pinched its skull until the expression changed to ended. The guardsman slept through the kill, because exhaustion is a truer sedative than peace. At dawn, the Vox found a voice brave enough to reach them. Not a man, something colder wrapped in authority. This is inquisitorial frequency Kappa 7. All Imperial assets respond with sitrep. The sergeant looked at Hulk as if the Vox had asked whether oxygen was allowed. Hulk shrugged. The sergeant pressed the rune. Kappa 7, this is 5th Catachan survivor element. Engaged and surviving. We have additional support. Describe support. The sergeant thought about religion and decided on blasphemy. Green, angry, effective. A pause, stuffed with calculations. Hold position, Tyrannid signatures converging on your location, estimated synapse node inbound, extraction contingent upon containment, survive. The Vox clicked off, proud of its optimism. The guardsmen began to dig, because men are happiest when they can make the ground hurt. Hulk stood in the open and looked toward a sound the ears had not announced yet. The jungle flared, birds shrieked, and the far canopy leaned away to allow a sin to pass. A carnifex, plated in cathedral-thick chitin, engine limbs pumping, more drafting air like a forge. Gowns poured around it, a veneer of obedience on a skull of appetite. Banner's voice bit down on panic and made it kneel. You can't just punch that. I can begin by punching it. The sergeant barked a litany of fields of fire. The heavy bolter wept joy as Hulk set it in place. When the first gaunts arrived, the men greeted them with light and intention. Hulk went to meet the carnifex. He didn't run. Running is for things that need momentum to matter. He walked. The monster lowered its head to swallow a problem. Hulk put his hands against the plates, felt the universe pick sides, and pushed. Bones that were not bones groaned. The ground begged for an end to this conversation. Hulk bent the head sideways, then farther, until the neck learned a new letter. The body kept arguing out of habit. He slammed it into a boulder that chose to become gravel rather than remain in this relationship. The synapse shadow thickened. Warriors came in a spearhead, a zoanthrope drifting behind them like a thought no one could afford. Hulk threw the carnifex's corpse into their theology. The zoanthrope's halo fluttered, bolter fire stitched the air. The squad held. A warrior reached the line. The sergeant met it with a machete that had read more obituaries than novels. He lost 2 fingers, and his fear. Hulk arrived and replaced the warrior's chest with his fist. The zoanthrope stared at him with the kind of eye that knows the alphabet of souls. The air hurt. Banner screamed once, then gripped the rails of Hulk's mind and held on. Hulk stepped forward through the pressure, reached up, and closed his hand around the brain that was more halo than meat. He squeezed until the power went out like a sunned candle. Silence tried again. The jungle sighed, disappointed. The guardsmen cheered badly and briefly, as men do when the future has not been warned. The sergeant slumped against a root the size of a tank tread. He looked at Hulk the way soldiers look at artillery that has developed opinions. We can't pay you. Don't want pay. Then what? Hulk looked toward the canopy, where the light had a sickly, pulsing quality, as if the sky itself had been colonized. More will come. The sergeant nodded. They always do. They moved again, deeper, because retreat on Catachan is just a different form of attack. The jungle paid attention now, curious. It sent trials the way a storm sends reminders, sinkholes webbed with roots, vines that extracted blood to learn a name, insects that wore faces for fun. Hulk trod through the curriculum. The squad followed in the footprint of a god who refused worship. At dusk the world dimmed early, the sky veiled by a shadow that moved against the wind. The Vox crackled half static, half dread. Mother forms detected in low orbit, spore fields descending, civilian centers compromised. If you can hear this, forgive me. The sergeant spat mud. They're seeding the whole hemisphere. Hulk watched the heavens bleed spores like an infection refusing subtlety. Banner spoke softly, as if good manners might make the math kinder. We can't fight a sky. No, Hulk said. We jump. We what? Hulk stared upward as if memorizing the distance between necessity and miracle. Rage rose, not the berserk flood, but a controlled tide. An engine brought to redline and held there by will and grief. He remembered a ship dying to kill him. He remembered orcs screaming his name as fire became their answer. He remembered the Imperium's faith and the Tyrannid's appetite, and found them identical. Hold the line, he told the sergeant. Make noise, make them look down. While you... up. The sergeant studied the geometry of suicide on Hulk's face and saw strategy. He saluted because there are moments when hierarchy is a poem. Emperor, watch you. He doesn't, Hulk said, and bent his knees. That's why I have to. He leapt. The jungle tore beneath the push, roots screaming loose from the earth. The air punched him, then tried to hold him, then lost interest as he became a green bullet climbing into red cloud. Birds turned to scraps of ink in his wake. Spore pods tumbled past, their skins translucent with murder. He tore 3 apart on the way because movement offends him when it is enemy. Banner's voice was a steady line of fear braided into awe. If you miss, I won't. The sky thinned into black ruined velvet. Above, the shadow of a Tyrannid bioship swam like a cathedral dreamed by famine. He struck its hide with a sound like a world stubbed its toe. Flesh metal screamed. He dug in. He climbed. He ripped. He found the warm places, arteries, the size of road tunnels, organs that pulsed with commandments. He made new doors. The ship protested in a language of pressure waves and pheromones. He answered with anatomy lessons written in his fists. When he reached the pulsing core, a brain grown for logistics of extinction, he remembered the zoanthrope's failing halo and squeezed the memory into his hands. He tore the core open. Light came out wet, living, angry. The ship spasmed. Its shadow slipped from the sky like a wound unclenching. He laughed once, a single sound that held joy hostage, and then let it go. Below, the jungle roared. Men roared louder. For a second, Catachan sounded like hope, and the planet didn't know what to do with it. He fell back through flames and spores and rain that could not decide if it was water or blood. He struck the earth near where he'd left the squad. The impact killed a circle of smaller regrets. The guardsmen were still alive, which felt like an editorial mistake the universe would soon correct. They crowded him with eyes, not hands. The sergeant's grin was a wound that had chosen optimism. You did it. Hulk shook acid and starlight from his knuckles. One ship. Above, more shadows moved. Hunger has logistics. They will send another, Banner said. I will go again, Hulk answered. The sergeant lowered his voice until even the jungle had to lean in. Why help us? Hulk looked at the men, at the mud on their teeth, at the faith they wore like debt. He thought of orcs who had called him God, of marines who had called him enemy, of a galaxy that loved a weapon more than the hand that dropped it. Because you are small, he said, almost gently, and you keep standing anyway. The sergeant nodded once. Because sometimes grace is an order you can obey. Then we stand. Hulk turned his gaze to the sky, the place where fathers live, and verdicts fall, and gods make excuses. His hands curled into new decisions. The jungle breathed out, relieved to have a monster on its side for an hour. Send your ships, he told the darkness. I'll send them back. And the planet listened, and the war took note, and the legend began to remember its own name. The jungle slept, if such a word could apply to a place that never truly forgives stillness. Smoke hung over the horizon like bruised breath. The night crawled, breathing through the wounds of men who refused to die. The Catachan survivors camped in a half-ruined supply depot carved into the roots of a petrified tree. Its hollow belly had once stored promethium and despair in equal measure. Now it held something stranger, silence, interrupted only by the rasp of a whetstone against a blade and the whisper of distant thunder. Hulk sat apart from them, half-shadowed by the ruin, the night draped across his shoulders like a cloak of regret. His breath came in slow rumbles that made the loose metal around him tremble. Banner's voice surfaced in the quiet. "They're afraid of you." Hulk didn't look up. "Good. No, not in the way orcs feared you. They're afraid because you helped them. That kind of fear is harder to carry." Hulk closed one fist around a piece of wrecked armor, once the carapace of a Tyranid warrior, and crushed it to dust between his fingers. "They're alive. That's enough." "Is it?" "For them, for me." He let the metal crumble through his palm like sand. "It's a start." The humans called him the Green Titan. Some whispered, the Emperor's mistake. To the Inquisition, he was a question that should never have been asked. Within a week of his return, a transmission crackled through the fog, a machine-voiced summons that reached across light years to where faith pretended to be reason. Unregistered xeno-anomaly detected. Inquisitorial vessel, oath of silence en route. All local forces maintain position. The sergeant listened to the message with the same expression one reserves for hurricanes and divine retribution. "They're coming," he muttered. "And they don't come to thank people." Hulk didn't answer. His gaze was fixed on the jungle canopy, where the clouds glowed faintly red with the reflection of the bio-ship still burning in orbit. Banner whispered inside his skull. "If they see what you've done here, if they understand what you are." "They won't understand," Hulk said simply. "They'll judge." The days bled into each other, humid and bright, filled with the constant hum of life, pretending not to be terrified. The guardsmen rebuilt their perimeter, hacking down trees that grew back overnight. Hulk helped them not because they asked, but because the motion kept him from thinking. Every log he lifted, every barricade he placed, was an argument against inertia. When he worked, the men stared. They saw a mountain moving among them, skin like sculpted metal, veins glowing faintly beneath the surface. He did not eat their food or share their tents. He stood watch while they slept, unmoving, a statue carved from the idea of endurance. They began to speak of him in whispers, like soldiers speak of miracles they don't want to jinx. "He doesn't sleep. He doesn't bleed right. He's not human, but maybe that's what we need." The Inquisition came on the third day. The dropship descended through the storm clouds like a sermon, its hull etched with purity seals that burned as they entered the atmosphere. When it landed, the earth itself seemed to recoil. Inquisitor Vaughn stepped out tall, austere, clad in armor that gleamed with the Emperor's sigils. His eyes were the color of steel polished by disappointment. Around him moved a retinue of stormtroopers, their weapons blessed and aimed in all directions. He surveyed the camp like a surgeon deciding where to cut. "Sergeant Marek," he said without looking at the man who saluted him. "Report." Marek's voice wavered but held. "Survivor element, sir. Catachan 5th. Enemy presence contained, with additional assistance." "Assistance," Vaughn repeated, as if the word itself were guilty. "Where?" Hulk stepped forward. The Inquisitor froze, not in fear, but in the stillness of a man realizing that what stood before him was an error written by the gods themselves. "Emperor, protect us," murmured one of the stormtroopers. Vaughn's expression didn't change. "Identify yourself." Hulk. Designation? None. Origin? Wrong universe. For a heartbeat, the Inquisitor said nothing. Then, with the precision of ritual, he drew a purity seal from his belt and pressed it against the air, whispering the litanies of verification. The parchment caught fire. Vaughn looked up slowly. "You are an anomaly, an unrecorded entity of immense destructive potential. By right, I should destroy you where you stand." Hulk's eyes glowed faintly in the dark. "Try." The silence that followed was long enough for the jungle to lean closer. Banner's voice murmured, uneasy. "Don't." But Hulk didn't move. Neither did the Inquisitor. The space between them was a battlefield waiting for permission. Finally, Vaughn lowered his weapon. "No. You're useful for now." The alliance was not trust. It was geometry. Two lines that met only because their directions demanded it. Vaughn needed a weapon to purge the last of the Tyrannid spores nesting in the deep jungles. Hulk needed a reason not to start walking until he found another war. So they hunted together man, monster, and the faithful. The stormtroopers moved with professional precision, cutting through the undergrowth with flamers and holy symbols. Hulk followed in silence, his footfalls shaking the soil. Every burst of gunfire illuminated the jungle's faces, predatory plants, half-digested corpses, and things that prayed with too many mouths. When the Tyrannid survivors struck, they came like an answer to unspoken sin. Rippers by the thousands, crawling rivers of teeth, warriors bursting from trees like blasphemies in bloom. The Inquisitor's men fought as though heaven was watching. Hulk fought as though nothing ever had. At one point, Vaughn saw Hulk tear a Carnifex in half. No weapon, no roar, just will. The pieces hit the ground still screaming. Vaughn turned to his acolyte. "You see that?" "Yes, my lord. That's why we can't let him live." The campaign lasted 6 days. By the end of it, the Tyrannid infestation was a memory carved into the bones of the jungle. The surviving guardsmen had begun to look at Hulk not with fear, but with something more dangerous belief. When the final nest burned, Vaughn approached him again. "You saved a world today," he said. "Not my world," Hulk answered. "It is now." Vaughn studied him, then added quietly, "I've seen monsters become saints before. It never ends well." "Then maybe I'll end it better." The Inquisitor almost smiled, a crack in marble. "Perhaps, but the Emperor doesn't allow legends. He imprisons them." That night, as the Inquisition prepared to leave, the sergeant approached Hulk one last time. His uniform was torn, his voice roughened by smoke and awe. "They'll take you, won't they?" "Yes." "To thank you." Hulk looked at the stars, where the inquisitorial ship glowed faintly like a judgment waiting to fall. "To study me. To cage me. Maybe to kill me. You could run. I've been running all my life." The sergeant swallowed. "You don't deserve this. Neither does anyone else." They stood together in silence, watching the jungle burn. When the ship's floodlights cut through the smoke, Hulk turned to him and said only one thing. "Tell them I died here." And then he walked into the light. Banner whispered, quiet as prayer, "We'll never be free." "Freedom's a story," Hulk replied. "Might as well make it a good one." And as the ramp closed around him, the jungle exhaled, and Catachan for the first time in memory slept without nightmares. The inside of the inquisitorial ship Oath of Silence was nothing like the chaos he had known before. There was no roar of war engines, no chant of orcs, no jungle screaming for blood. Only order. Cold, immaculate, suffocating order. The corridors stretched like veins of polished steel, lit by candles that never flickered. Every surface bore inscriptions in High Gothic, prayers carved into metal with a devotion that could cut flesh. The air reeked of oil, sanctity, and fear. When Hulk walked, the deck plates groaned. Servitors scuttled out of sight like insects. Priests clutched their rosaries and whispered words he could not hear or perhaps dared not speak aloud. They had bound him in chains the size of tank treads, not because they could hold him but because the Inquisition liked to pretend everything could be contained. Inquisitor Vaughn led him through the endless maze of corridors without looking back. His robes whispered against the floor. Around them, machine priests muttered binary hymns to the Omnissiah, their eyes glowing with mechanical piety. "You are not a prisoner," Vaughn said at last, his voice flat, clinical. "You are a question, and we must find an answer." Hulk's chains rattled. "You'll break before I do." Vaughn ignored him. "We've seen many monsters in this galaxy, daemons, primarchs, even gods, but none quite like you. You do not belong to our reality, and yet you bleed, think, and rage as if you were made for it. Maybe your universe was made for me." Vaughn's mouth twitched, a shadow of amusement. The warp would agree with that. They brought him to a chamber deep within the ship, part cathedral, part laboratory. The walls were lined with relics, each humming faintly with caged divinity. At the center stood a massive containment ring, etched with sigils that pulsed in dull gold. "You will stay here," Vaughn said, "not as a prisoner, but as a subject of study. Do not resist, and you may yet serve the Emperor's purpose." Banner's voice stirred in the quiet. "We've heard that before." "Yeah," Hulk muttered under his breath. "Didn't like it the first time." The servitors activated the containment field. Light folded inward. Hulk felt the energy press against his skin, trying to define him, to measure something that could never fit inside numbers or fear. The machine whined. Sparks leapt from the sigils. Then the light died, snuffed out like a candle. The chamber filled with smoke and silence. Vaughn exhaled slowly. Fascinating. Weeks passed, or what passed for weeks in the void. They tested him endlessly. Strength, endurance, psychic resistance. He endured it all in silence. When they shot him, he healed. When they burned him, he endured. When they probed his mind with psychers, they screamed before he did. "The warp recoils from him," said one astropath, her eyes bleeding from behind her blindfold. "It cannot read him as if he is something older than it is." Vaughn listened, took notes, and asked the same question every time. "What are you, creature?" Each time, Hulk gave the same answer. "Tired." Between tests, he sat in the dark, his mind a battlefield of two voices. Banner, the man who still believed in control. And Hulk, the beast who believed in survival. The line between them had thinned to transparency. There were moments now when he could feel both think and feel, rage and reason, as one. Banner would ask, "Are we the last of us?" Hulk would answer, "We were never supposed to last." They were not arguing anymore. They were becoming one thought, one being forged by every war, every betrayal, every resurrection. Sometimes, the ship's crew would gather near his cell, not to mock him, not to threaten, but to pray. They called him the penitent god. Some said he was a lost Primarch, hidden from history. Others whispered he was a test from the Emperor himself, a mirror sent to measure humanity's arrogance. Hulk listened to their prayers and said nothing. Faith, he had learned, was just another form of fear, and the Imperium was built entirely on fear. One night, if such a word existed in the void, alarms screamed through the ship. The red emergency lights turned every shadow into blood. "Inquisitor to the bridge." Unknown warp distortion bearing 3 to 7 by. The voice cut off. Vaughn stormed into the chamber, his face lit by the dying glow of runes. "We're being boarded. Chaos Warband. They must have tracked our psychic signal." The deck trembled. Screams echoed from the lower decks. Hulk felt the vibration before the first explosion hit. "Release me." Vaughn hesitated. "You're more dangerous than they are." "Then you'll need me." The Inquisitor's jaw tightened. He gave the command. The shackles unlocked with a hiss. Hulk rose slowly, the weight of the chains falling away like the last illusions of restraint. "What will you do?" Vaughn asked. "What I always do." The corridor outside was a nightmare given form. Daemon fire licked the walls. Servitors screamed as they were torn apart by claws that dripped with warp ichor. The air itself twisted, thick with whispers and mockery. At the far end of the hall, a Chaos Space Marine strode through the smoke armor blackened and fused with flesh, his bolter roaring hymns to gods that feasted on despair. Hulk met him halfway. The Marine fired. Bolter shells exploded across Hulk's chest, shattering on his skin like glass on stone. He slammed his fist forward, and the traitor's armor folded inward, collapsing like paper. The impact painted the corridor red. Another came, then 3, then 10. Hulk roared. The ship trembled. Every daemon that stepped into the corridor felt that roar, a sound not of wrath, but of refusal. The warp itself flickered, retreating an inch from the defiance of something it could not own. When the battle ended, the ship was still burning. Bodies, human, daemon, and things between, lay strewn across the deck. Hulk stood amid the wreckage, his breath steady. Vaughn approached, limping, his robes torn and stained with ash. "You saved us." No, Hulk said. I saved them. He pointed to the surviving crew, huddled together like children. You just watched. Vaughn met his gaze, saw no hatred there, only weariness. Then let me repay that mercy. He raised his hand. Hulk heard the click before he saw the device, a null field generator, glowing with the pale light of finality. The Emperor does not allow miracles to walk free. Banner's voice surged, panicked. Move! But Hulk didn't. He stared into Vaughn's eyes and said softly, You already lost control the moment you let me live. Then he stepped forward. The null field screamed, light shattered, the deck split, the entire ship convulsed as two powers, faith and fury, collided. When the blinding glow faded, there was only silence. The oath of silence drifted in the void, its systems dead, its crew gone. Weeks later, a salvage team found it. They reported one thing that did not belong, a single footprint burned into the deck plates, leading to an airlock that had been ripped open from the inside. No bodies, no blood, only a trail of melted steel leading into the stars. Somewhere on the edge of the galaxy, an inquisitorial beacon recorded a faint transmission. A deep, distorted voice broken by static, but unmistakably alive. Hulk still lives. Then nothing. Time has no meaning in the void. There are no suns to count, no planets to orbit, only the slow breathing of eternity. For a long while, that was all there was breathing. A sound like thunder held captive inside a man. He drifted between stars, a green ember in an ocean of black, his body wrapped in the frost of space and the echo of memories too heavy to die. Banner slept, Hulk dreamed. And in the dream, the two were one, not in conflict, but in communion. In that silence, even rage found peace. For a moment, he awoke to gravity. A crash. A roar of air. Then heat. He had fallen again, this time onto a barren world of stone and storm. No life, no light, no sound but the howling of wind across endless ruins. The armor fragments clinging to him, remains of the inquisitorial ship, smoked and cooled, their purity seals turned to ash. He stood slowly, looking around. A dead world, once civilized, now hollowed out by war. He had seen too many like it. For a while, he wandered among the ruins, letting the wind speak where no voices remained. There were signs of civilization, massive cathedrals collapsed upon themselves, statues of the Emperor buried beneath their own devotion. Skeletons in power armor knelt before altars that no longer held gods. Everywhere he went, he found relics of faith. And everywhere, faith had lost. You fit here, Banner whispered. Hulk grunted. I don't fit anywhere. Maybe that's what makes you a legend. No, Hulk said, his voice low. Legends die when people stop being afraid of them. He turned toward the horizon. I'm still here. They found him first, the scavengers. Not men, not entirely. Survivors of some forgotten war, dressed in rags of power armor and carrying weapons older than memory. Their eyes glowed faintly, touched by radiation and faith gone wrong. When they saw him, they fell to their knees. He returns, one whispered. The green god walks again. Hulk's brow furrowed. No gods. But they didn't hear him. They were already chanting broken hymns made of static and devotion. In days, the word spread. In weeks, pilgrims came. They came from the void, from dead ships, from shrines that no longer prayed to anyone but echoes. They came bearing relics, pieces of old orc totems, imperial banners, even bones carved into symbols. All for him. They built shrines of twisted metal around where he stood. They painted his image on walls, a colossal silhouette with burning eyes, arms outstretched like judgment. They called him many names. Dark Green God, the Emperor's Shadow, the last Warboss, the Broken Saint. And though Hulk said nothing, he did not leave. Because in their worship, he saw something familiar. Not devotion, not hope. Purpose. He began to help them not as a leader, but as a builder. When raiders attacked, he fought. When machines broke, he repaired. When the storms came, he stood against them like a wall. He did not rule them, but they began to follow him anyway. Banner's voice had grown quieter over the years, but when he spoke now, It was with strange calm. "You're not fighting anymore. Maybe fighting's not all I am. They think you're divine. Let them think. If faith keeps them alive, it's better than fear. And you?" Hulk paused, looking down at the villagers building fires beneath the ruins of cathedrals. "I'm learning to live without one. Peace never lasts. Not in this galaxy." They came one morning from the east ships, with black hulls marked by the sigils of the Inquisition, smaller than the Oath of Silence, but carrying the same arrogance. The pilgrims panicked, scattering into the ruins. Some prayed, others picked up weapons older than their grandfathers. Hulk simply watched. The lead ship landed with the grace of a threat. The air hissed as its ramp opened, and from it stepped another Inquisitor. Not Vaughn. This one was younger, sharper eyes, sharper faith. She walked toward him without hesitation, boots crunching on ash and bone. "So it's true," she said. "The heretic lives." Hulk said nothing. "You're an abomination, a relic from a reality that has no place in ours. But you saved Catachan, didn't you? Killed Tyranids, defied chaos. You think that makes you righteous?" "No," he said simply. "It just means I'm not done." "You cannot exist," she said. "You disrupt the balance. You make people believe in something other than the Emperor. That is heresy." Hulk looked past her at the pilgrims huddled behind the ruins, eyes wide, trembling. "You're wrong," he said. "I make them believe they can survive." She raised her pistol. "And that is exactly what makes you dangerous." The gun fired once. The bolt struck his chest and vanished in smoke. He stepped forward, slow and deliberate. She fired again, again, again. Each round exploded uselessly against his skin. Her hand shook, but her voice didn't. "You can't kill a god," she whispered. "Then stop trying," Hulk said. He reached out, took the gun from her hand, and crushed it. The soldiers around her raised their weapons, but she lifted her hand. "No." Her voice cracked. "He's not our enemy." She looked up at him, and for a brief second, there was something in her eyes that was not faith. It was recognition. "Go," she said quietly, "before I stop believing that." Hulk turned away. He didn't thank her. He didn't look back. He just walked until the ruins swallowed him whole. He traveled for years after that from world to world, never staying, never explaining. On some planets, they worshipped him as a god. On others, they cursed him as a daemon. He didn't correct either, because both were true, in a way. Somewhere, far from the light of any sun, an imperial record was written. Subject: the Green Titan. Status: unconfirmed. Threat level: variable. Believed to be neutralized numerous Xenos threats. Currently under observation at the edge of Segmentum Pacificus. Engagement not recommended without the authority of the Golden Throne. But in the places where data didn't reach, in the whispers of soldiers dying on distant fronts, in the prayers of those who had no gods left, the legend grew. They said the Green Titan walked worlds torn apart by war and made them quiet again. That when the void whispered madness, his voice silenced it. That when the Emperor turned his gaze away, the Green One still watched. They said his eyes burned not with anger, but with memory. And that somewhere, on the edge of the galaxy, he waited not for salvation, but for understanding. One night, in a forgotten system where even stars had stopped shining, he stood on the hull of a derelict cruiser. The void stretched endlessly before him. Banner's voice, faint and distant, broke the silence. "We became what they feared." "Maybe that's all anyone becomes here," Hulk said. "Do you think he, their Emperor, would understand us?" Hulk's gaze stayed on the endless dark. "If he's still alive, he doesn't have time to understand. He just endures. Like us." Hulk smiled faintly, not joy, but acceptance. "Exactly." And then, slowly, he knelt. Not in prayer, not in surrender, but in acknowledgement of everything this galaxy had taken and everything it had failed to destroy. The stars blinked, as if bowing back, and the legend of the Green God, the Hulk of Warhammer 40K, drifted on through eternity, somewhere between divinity and damnation. The galaxy forgot his name long before it forgot his shadow. That was mercy. Names invite expectation, and expectation is a chain. He had broken every chain but one, the memory of why he ever fought. He wandered through the cold margins of the Imperium, a ghost among worlds that no longer remembered peace. Some planets called him a saint, others cursed his arrival as an omen. Everywhere he went, something changed, not because he willed it, but because presence itself was a kind of judgment. He was no longer a man, or a monster, or even a myth. He was witness, the living storm that had seen the beginning of everything and refused to die in its ending. Once, he found himself upon a world of ash and silence. No air, no water, no hope. Yet the ruins of a city still stood, skeletal towers piercing the sky like gravestones too proud to fall. Among them wandered machines that mimicked men, servitors left without masters, performing endless, meaningless duties. They dug graves in the dust, not knowing who to bury. They prayed to dead stars with mechanical voices. Hulk watched them for hours, listening to their hollow hymns. When one fell, its circuits finally fading, he knelt and covered it with stone. Banner whispered softly from within, "You bury everything you touch." "Someone has to," Hulk murmured. "The galaxy won't." He stayed there for 7 days, alone with the machines, until the last servitor's voice went silent. When he left, the wind seemed quieter. Far beyond that dead world, there was war again. There always is. A crusade, they called it. The Imperium of Man, bleeding yet unbowed, was always crusading somewhere. He came to them not as a savior, but as a shadow walking through their front lines. They called him Old One, the verdant ghost, that which walks after the bombardment. The soldiers saw him first, a towering silhouette in green-gray armor that wasn't armor, skin that shimmered like ancient jade. When they fired, he didn't move. When they prayed, he didn't answer. But when the Tyranids came, or the daemons clawed through reality, he stood. And when he fought, the soldiers forgot fear for a while. He never spoke. He simply walked away when it was done, leaving behind nothing but silence and awe. Word of him reached Terra, eventually. It always does. The Administratum recorded his sightings with bureaucratic precision. Unidentified xeno-humanoid, observed leading refugee evacuation from Hive Faranis A9. No recorded allegiance, no vocalization of heretical creed. Possible residual psychic null. Filed, stamped, forgotten. Because the Imperium has no patience for miracles it cannot tax or control, and so the legend drifted further outward to the edge of known space, where the stars grew sick and the laws of physics prayed for forgiveness. Out there, the warp storms danced like gods drunk on entropy. Ships entered and never returned. But something moved within those storms. A figure larger than memory, walking through lightning that looked suspiciously like reverence. The few survivors who escaped called it the Green Saint of the Void. They said he did not kill demons, he unmade them. That his voice could quiet the warp itself, if only for a heartbeat. That even chaos hesitated to whisper his name. He found himself drawn one day to a place that was not a planet, but a scar, the ruins of a world consumed long ago by Tyranids. Only bone and silence remained. There, in the Valley of Skulls, something waited for him. Not human, not xeno, not even alive, by any measure that mattered. It was her. The Inquisitor, older now, eyes dull with exhaustion, armor faded to gray. She had hunted him once. Now she sat among the bones, waiting like a penitent before the altar of extinction. When he approached, she smiled faintly. "I told them you were real," she said. "They didn't believe me. They never do." "You shouldn't have come," he said. "I've nowhere else left. The wars don't end. The saints are all dead. The Emperor doesn't answer." Hulk stood beside her, watching the wind scatter ashes like confetti for the dead. "He answers," Hulk said softly. "You just don't like what he says." She looked at him, eyes weary but still sharp. "And what does he say?" "Keep fighting." She laughed, a brittle, beautiful sound. "You sound like him." "No," Hulk said, his voice like gravel breaking under gravity. "He sounds like me." They sat together in the quiet. No prayer, no doctrine, just two beings too tired to believe in endings. When she died days later, quietly, Like a candle that finally understood darkness, he buried her beside the others. No words. Only a simple marker made from her own broken blade. Years or centuries later, no one could say. The universe grew darker. The Astronomicon flickered. Warp storms multiplied. The Imperium still fought. The Xenos still devoured. The gods still laughed. But in the endless noise of apocalypse, there were still whispers of one who walked alone. Sometimes, he appeared on dying worlds just long enough to help the last human evacuate. Sometimes, he stood against fleets, his roar scattering lesser daemons like leaves in a storm. Sometimes, he was seen on the hull of drifting ships, staring into the void as if listening for something only he could hear. Always, he vanished before anyone could ask why. In the end, he returned to where it had begun, to a world the maps called forgotten, the locals called cursed, and the galaxy called irrelevant. It was Catachan. The jungle had grown thicker, meaner, older. But when he stepped upon its soil, the ground remembered him. Every vine stilled, every predator hid. Even the air hesitated. He walked the paths he once had burned through with fire and fury. He found the ruins of the Imperial outpost, now swallowed by roots. He found the graves. And he found the silence. He stood there until dawn, or something like dawn, painted the canopy in poisonous gold. Banner's voice broke the long quiet. "You could stay this time." "There's no staying," Hulk said. "Then, what are we?" "Witness." "To what?" He looked to the horizon, where a new fire rose in the distance, not sunrise, but war. Always war. To everything they can't stop repeating. He turned, his massive silhouette cutting through the jungle like myth reborn. "Maybe one day," he said softly, "the galaxy will learn." "And if it doesn't?" Banner asked. "Then I'll still be here to remind it." He walked into the storm. And for a moment, just long enough for myth to blink, the jungle whispered something back. A single word, carried on the wind like memory made sound. "Thanks." Somewhere, far away, in the echoing halls of the Astronomicon, a faint pulse of green light flickered across the warp. A whisper, a rumor, a warning. The machine priests recorded it and filed it away as anomaly. But the psychers, the ones who still had dreams left to fear, woke screaming the same phrase over and over. "He's still watching." The stars shifted. The galaxy burned. And the legend of the Green God, the last witness of wrath and mercy, endured. Because in the grim darkness of the far future, there is no peace, no forgiveness, no end. Only the echo of one impossible voice, rumbling through eternity like thunder that refuses to fade. Hulk, still, lives.